Hello, poets. Are you ready? Bartow Culp at the Burwell School came over this morning to clean up a bit and to plant a dogwood tree and to look at the state of the sod and ground to see if we really could do the readings here today. And he reported back a little wet, but it looks fine for the poet's porch. And I thought, yes, it's the poet's porch. We can do this every year. All we need is a good day, which is hard to come by sometimes. But we're so grateful to St. Matthew's Church for saying they would rescue us if we could not be outdoors. So I hope it's a historic day for the historic poet's porch and then works. And I'm Fran McCullough. I'm the chair of the events committee. We have not had a live event in well over a year. So we're very excited to see you all here and to be here ourselves. Yes. So we are celebrating National Poetry Month, of course. This event sold out in a matter of hours, which is unprecedented for us. And I think most poetry people give poetry readings. And it just shows how beloved Francis and Paul are in this community. So we are delighted to have them. We have two native Tarheel poets here, Florence from Tarboro, Paul from Hickory. They've taken very different paths to get here today. And although their poems are quite different, they also share a number of wonderful qualities, which you'll notice when they read. Florence's 2 books of poems are on sale at the little table. If you haven't looked at them yet, be sure to after the reading. Brooks Gravener will be introducing Florence after Paul's reading. And when readings are finished, we'll have open mic time for questions, comments, objections. Paul has no books on sale here at the little table because, as far as I know, everything he's written is online, available free. Is that right, Paul?
Most of it. That's my point.
Can you find a scrap of paper for sale with a Paul Jones poem on it?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, I haven't looked hard
I think it's 30 years old.
The late Reynolds Price, another much beloved character in our area, was a great fan of Paul's, and he said he knew of no other poet quite like Paul. That is really true, though he made him sound very weighty, which is true, but the spiritual avoirdupois is often concealed between a playful, quirky surface. It could take you a while to catch the full phrase. His book is titled What the Welsh and the Chinese Have in Common, which is something to ponder, but so simple you probably won't guess it for a while. It's like that old riddle that was around in the 70s, sun but not moon. Anybody remember that? He has work in the Best Erotic Poems anthology, which goes back to 1880. I'm sure they missed a lot of early erotic poetry. That's great. He has a manuscript of his poems on the moon. Maybe he'll tell us why. So with that, Paul, we would love to hear your comments.
Is the mic on?
Yes. Let me see if I can. Don't worry, I'll take this off and I'll also project.
Get as close as possible.
Okay. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm delighted to be here with Florence and at the Burwell School and in front of a bunch of friends and everyone who's related to Florence.
Who's a big fan?
Highly extended. I'll just do a couple of things here. I came out of information sharing, questioning copyright, copyleft. So out of that information access movement, and I've been doing that since the 1980s. Free software is a part of that. So software like poetry has a distribution problem, not an access problem. And so when I went away for poetry to raise my son and to do some work with developing something that later became the World Wide Web and streaming radio and some databases and bringing humanities into things like the Louisiana Slave Database and some other stuff. I really kind of changed my attitude towards poetry. It was kind of in the background. I loved it and read it, but I really wasn't doing anything towards a career. And then when I came back to it, I noticed that the places that I had aspired to publish, if they weren't online, I actually didn't care. I really wanted readers and access. So all the poems that I'll read have been published. They're available online. I'll tell you where. And also list them all at, what else? My website. smalljones.com. There are too many Paul Joneses, but there's only one Small Jones. See, I'll talk about the moon during the question session, but let's just say that they're there. What shape they're in, yet to be seen. And of the poems, it's Best American Erotic Poetry, 1800 to present. That poem will not be read today. It's not that erotic, but it is filthy. It was written by Dafydd ap Gwilym, the greatest Welsh poet, in contemporary of Chaucer. And I just did a translation and a version of that, and suddenly it became American and best, thanks to David Lehman. This poem, the first poem, is in a magazine called Light, which started out a paper publication and now is online only, which is dedicated to light verse. My roommate Geoffrey, for I will consider my roommate Geoffrey, for despite being pretentious and a stoner, he pays his part of the bills on time, except for the power bill, which he considers an illegal tax. For when he has the munchies, he will share his late night burrito with me and any guest. But as he is vegan, it will be stuffed with tofu and beans and onion, thereby making the offer one that is rarely accepted. For he is a fan of classic rock. More than a fan. He played In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida on vinyl, on repeat, for days, until he misplaced the record, or the cleaning crew took it, or he can't recall just now. For he clips his toenails while sitting on our shared sofa, which he will clean up eventually. For while he clips, he cheers on perpetually losing sports teams, the almost made it, amongst whom are the Cubs, Cleveland, even with LeBron, Carolina football, both Panthers and Tar Heels, and even the Hamilton Tiger Cats. For he will not surf from a sports channel once he is engaged, nor will he allow another to participate in such practice. For he loses sports bets with dignity, but without actual payment of said losses. For he wears a vintage Jimi Hendrix t-shirt each year on September 18th. For said shirt has not been washed since 1970 on that terrible day. For he reminds me and everyone of this fact on that day. For he spells his name not as Chaucer hath spelt his name. Thus he pronounces it unlike any other person, and expects you to do the same. For his girlfriends are cute and inconstant, but not infrequent. For he is often out of the apartment when they visit, for they often want to share wine. Once the wine is shared, one named Sally, who I especially enjoy, confesses, I am the true object of her interest and affection. For Geoffrey does not trust me to feed his cat Nico, although I am very reliable, and Nico prefers my company to that of Geoffrey's. For he is traveling to Columbia, despite State Department warnings not to go there, for he seeks the only pot worth smoking. For Geoffrey has only one key, which he has left with Sally while he is traveling. For he has asked her to check on his cat while he is away, and she has been very reliable. For we have gotten quite serious. For he never holds a grudge. For he is forgiving. For he stays away for months. The next point we're going to shift this to a little bit was in the News and Observer's book page, when they used to have a book page and they used to publish poems, and then it got picked up by Georgianne Eubanks for her Literary Trails of Piedmont, North Carolina. The poem takes place in 1954, which is the opening of the Park Road Shopping Center in Charlotte, the first shopping center, not a mall, and also Brown versus Board of Education, which North Carolina managed to ignore for about 20 years. Dividing waters. Signs divided the waters when all the creeks were rerouted around the evangelist father's field, and crops withered as the shopping center sprouted, and red hills of clay mounted in red dust and oily mist. Even their hair was crimson, men at break, the setting sun, their hard work clinging to them, made them all seem like one red race. But too soon they were replaced, as if by magic whim, by clean, careful, concrete men. What was to come next was grand. A J.C. Penney store with tiles that set departments apart like pools of rain that captured only one tint. The boys section was lime green, the toys brown, sports blue, and more. My grandmother took me in. I think I was about 4. And the grand old man himself held the door as we poured to gawk at the full shelves, wonderfully uniformed bins, and tall, tight-lipped women. Thirsty from all this outpour, I looked for water fountains and found 2 flanking the door. One shiny metal, marked white, and a white one marked colored. New, but with a dripping drain. Still, the colored one seemed right. I stepped up for a cool sip, one hand bravely on the knob, thinking I'd made the slip. With a rough yank, I was robbed of my try for those colors and shoved to the other by my silent grandmother. But there, the water ran red. My lips looked like they had bled. A blood common to all kids. The drips draining on the tiles ran into the young new styles section like biblical curses. I drank deep and almost burst. The next poem is inspired here in Hillsborough. It's an ekphrastic poem. Ekphrastic poems are poems after art or man-made objects or whatever. This is an unnamed burial at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church Cemetery in Hillsborough, North Carolina. It was in ekphrastic review, properly. A small grave marked unnamed, without date or acclaim, past centuries' mystery performs a ministry of grace in this churchyard. This modest slab set hard against the worst weather, something meant forever, becomes grief's darkest gift. A stillbirth swiftly shifts love from cradle to grave. Was this small life unsaved, unbaptized, unnamed? So pure a life was reclaimed before life could begin, before the curse of sin. Yet love with that life stayed, where roots have made a braid, a resurrection fern, each rain in green returns. This next poem was in a journal called Red Fez, and then earlier this week I got to read it to the Carrboro Aldermen as because it's April and they have a poet kick off their meetings, whereas certain other councils might have other openings. It's called Ode to a Certain Feeling of Optimism. Russell says I shouldn't trust it. I should know by now. Soon enough it will let me down. One more dent in a lovely old car. A scratch on my favorite glasses. A friend who doesn't make the right choices. Too much hot sauce, which I love, but should know the circumstances, consequences. Excess is its own reward, I want to tell him. An excess of hope? Can that even exist? I hope not. I hope I can find a way to share this feeling, to say, that next cup of coffee won't be burnt. It will never need cream or sugar. That my parents are in a better place, their late pains having paid their dues. That they are allowed to enter whatever afterlife can afford them. Here's my certain feeling of optimism. I want to share it with all of you. I don't want to shake it. It stirs in me like a deep muscle flexing each time I pass it on. This next one, it was in the North Carolina Literary Review and was second place in their Jim Applewhite Prize. And if you're a poet, this is a good time to send in poems. That's open right now. And as if you're a reader, it's a good time to subscribe or look at their online version. It's called Clear Channel. My grandmother staked her lot with signs. Cleopatra Fortune, reader and canary breeder. She tugged me to her side and showed me her white bird. Through her few teeth, she hissed her words. The mildewed air washed her swollen ankles. She shuffled as if manacles kept her there. She dissolved into a chair. Give me your palm and you'll dream your true name, she said. But I made a fist and ran upstairs and dove under the covers, the radio's blast pushed to my ear. A signal across the clear channel carried an earnest Cuban voice that warned of reds. Between ballads, someone sold olive oil, religion, and dark cigars. A crackle came, then a samba. Soon that stopped. Instead, it grew like the language of the spirits I knew my grandmother knew. Half naked, I half heard a hovering overhead and nearly said, black wings, black day. The next thing was that song, beckoning. I tossed my little radio off the bed and let the canary songs fly into my head. The power went out. What I knew of darkness grew, as thick as doubt. Against the blackness, I held out my hand till a step on the stairs creaked, grandmother. In the cool air, I took the name she said, and the music of late night bloomed glad. The next poem came from Silver Birch Press, which has an ongoing thing right now. This was the poem that sort of kicked off this session, which is tributes to Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And the way you do the tribute is you use the phrase, "I'm still waiting," in it. Y'all might know Lawrence Ferlinghetti is a UNC grad who later did good by running a bookstore and publishing obscene poetry. Certifiably obscene because it was Allen Ginsberg's Howl and the subject of a famous pornography and obscenity trial, which Ferlinghetti won. But that has nothing to do with this point. Still waters. I'm still waiting for the one moment that old Eastern sages say gives absurdity and absolute clarity. The moment multiple ball monks chant to induce. They say the way is like water. It will work its wonders at due time. The way water always breaks up rocks, turns them into sand, but will not be transformed itself. Being water, it's already what it needs to be. Winter and ice merely redefine water. Wind, when it works, only works on the surface of water. When fire meets water, water is sent to heaven, but fire becomes ash. Water, like saints, returns to perform its steady work. Sleet, snow, rain, or hail, even fog, are water's temporary bodies. In time, water will be all part of one huge sea. Water will save us all in time. In time, they say. In the meantime, be water as best you can. Me, I'm still waiting for all waters to become still, to run deep and clear up a few things. We're at the edge of a momentous occasion when the cicadas appear. This is a poem dedicated to them from a wonderful little online place called Grand Little Things, dedicated to formal poetry. Cicadas. I treasure what they have left behind, those bards who leave past bodies dirt-covered, clinging, emptied, musicless, enshrined on a string as I necklace them like clover. I've collected an anthology of shells as I hear them reciting the poetry that they have learned while underground, then of their climb up the walls, the oak tree. At lonely moments, they speak only to me. To others, they are untuned, warped violins. I'm soothed by their joyous cacophony, their chant as they suck life from leaf stems. What have they left for us in their rebirth flight? Poems from three worlds, hope beyond day and night. This next poem was first in Canopy, and then it got picked up by two print journals. One, O. Henry, out of Greensboro, and one Pine Straw out of Southern Pines. These are what we know as city magazines, and they do a poetry every month issue. And in happier times, you would find them in the motel room. I don't know where you'd find them now. This is praying mantids, pairing mantids. It's about praying mantises. He has only one job to do, and she with her he has only one job to do, and she with her hunger, her need to feed the future without him by consuming him, has a lot to get done before winter. His head tilts slightly, like a sinner at communion, like a teen expecting his first kiss to be like lightning. Then his body starts to do the work it was built to do. She turns towards him and wipes off his face. He knows it's all over, but his body keeps on, unknowing itself. His is the kind of stupid happiness you can only appreciate at a distance. The kind you know cannot be as good as it looks. Hers is the work of duty and a different devotion. While he takes her from behind, she takes him head first, just like she took a yellow-striped hornet who would have taken her to his own hideaway, just as she took the grasshopper who was tired of summer, as she took the large green moth who had no mouth of its own. She ignored those magnificent wings, let them fall, as she ignores the thrusting body that falls away from hers. He dies two deaths at once, the deaths of love and the deaths of life. But the moment between, the moment before it all ends, is the moment of his glory and the beginning of her toil. This last poem was in the Poetry magazine, called Better Tomorrow. From day's edge, I look back, balancing the red of loss against the gain in black. My mind constructs twin towers, and in pies, I show the cost of how I spent my hours. 20% on lust, desire for someone not here, and the rest on envy, lost to rich dreams of repayment, careful castles in the air, but dreams like installments in buying down the debt. Such dreams convert to words, and words, actions are kept, like armies awaiting reveille. I need only speak to urge them to a thunderous melee. Then, how to account for that? Should I picture my revenge as bodies lost from combat, or like Trajan's column, troops from a looting binge twisting up in solemn stone profile? Wealth and winning, even in the abstract, attract. Folks say they aren't everything. Yet, nearer to the final bargain, I find the currency of tact does little to requite my pain. West of my window, a red sun sets. That angry medallion glows before it calls it quits. What follows but nighttime, darkening from vermilion to profit at the bottom line. Thank you.
Just, up, down, take it out of the stand.
a prelude for Florence Nash. Florence Nash lives a both and kind of life. Poet and teacher, world traveler, and native North Carolinian, at home in Paris and at home in Tarboro. Performer and commentator, editor and author, lover of words and lover of music, of sights and sounds. Good poetry, like good music, bears up under repeated listening. Florence Nash composes good poetry, poetry that stings and bites, that soothes and comforts, poetry that arrests our attention and compels us to listen with joy and wonder. I invite you to listen and to savor the poetry and the presence of Florence Nash.
Brooks, that's a hard act to follow. Thank you so much. And thank you, Fran. Where's Fran?
Over here.
Thank you, Fran. This is wonderful to be here. And can you hear? Oh, this may be the best thing about this reading is I get to take off my mask. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am happy to be here and I'm grateful to you all for being here. And I just was saying to Sally Green, I don't think I've ever read poetry in my life while getting to look at something as lovely as just this little park or whatever it is of green. And I had a good time figuring out, it's been a while since I've given a reading, and I love just going through stuff and deciding what I wanted to pull out and what feels good in the mouth. And I realized I write a lot about, I spent a lot of my adult life out of North Carolina, out of the South. One of my favorite sayings is, whoever discovered water, it wasn't a fish. And I think you're more qualified to sort of look back and puzzle over what you came from when you've been out of it for a while. So I write a lot about Eastern North Carolina, a lot of the questions that arise from having lived sort of a couple of different kinds of life. And I write a lot about the Outer Banks, about Nags Head, because that's where I say to people, if I were a Native American and I needed to be at the place where the ghosts of my ancestors dwell, it would be Nags Head. So I'm going to read some poems about these places and other stuff. If you can't hear me, please say so. I'm going to start with NC Highway 98 East. I know this landscape better than I know myself. These piney woods, these fields that by God ever were and ever shall be corn, tobacco, peanuts, and soybeans. And hollering from the billboards, John 3:16. In Sunday morning light, the countryside is decorous and spare, an algebra of ditch bank, furrow, crow, and steeple. Everywhere, the four square certitude of double wides. No room for questions here, and I'm nothing but. From my car radio, box cello suites pump like oxygen into a diving bell as Ford and Chevy pickups roll off the road into the gracious shade of pecan trees that ring the packed dirt churchyards. At 13, Pablo Casals rummaged in a used bookshop for scores and found his life. Ran all the way home, clutching the pages to his chest. And every day for 35 years, he played the sweets until he understood them. Now his bow dips and pulls, the music gathers and trembles like sap from a cut stem, voicing its questions over and over. The cello cries out in my car, urging and tugging, lifting me by the roots of my hair toward I cannot imagine What home? What self? And here's another sort of backhanded love song to Eastern North Carolina. This is called Kudzu Jesus. This is the epigraph. The second coming, Kudzu Jesus appears in Raleigh. An image of Jesus, or what could be Jesus, has been spotted in a kudzu vine growing on a utility pole next to railroad tracks in Raleigh, North Carolina. UPI, 19 August 2009. Climbing out of cake-rich black dirt, red clay, this green, greedy life makes its swift way unstoppable as flood, lapping in leafy wavelets, overwrapping telephone poles, rusted tractors, trees, trucks, all things failed, abandoned, busted. Kudzu flings cathedrals over these. Our poor soiled planet, nearly spent and slowing, needs encouragement, salve for its wounds. This vine endures, ascends, entwines, obscures where our detritus ends and earth begins. It covers up a multitude of sins. So, whether that was Jesus there or no, kudzu's not bad as second comings go. Oh well. Oh, never mind. Another poem from east of I-95. This is from the banks of the mighty Tar River that I grew up as a happy little river rat on the river. And here again, it sort of raises questions. At Blue Banks, named for it's a place in the river named for the fabulous play there, which is a lovely blue. And its singular property is apparently it is a absolutely fabulous preservative for fossils. At Blue Banks. In the woods above Bell's Bridge, there's a deep sliced curve of riverbank where old folks string the water with their trot lines in the day-long shade, and the warden never comes. Big shad hover close in season, and the smell is of clay and leaf rot. I know someone who goes there, tools bundled in his canoe. He slides downstream along the steep bank rearing from the river, digs through cross-hatched root and bramble for giant shark's teeth, knuckled scallop shells, once a vertebra big as a bucket, bones from big fins that have not fluttered in 100 million years. This is flat fields and plain facts country. Sunday preachers thump their Bibles, red-faced and sweating with conviction, and summon down the unassailable word, while the river runs on slow and muddy through the woods, patiently carving out its counter-proposition. And while we're in a religious mood, oh, by the way, I don't know what, some of these have been published, some of them are published in this form, some of them in journals elsewhere. I have just found to my great sorrow that if you're a serious poet, you're supposed to keep a spreadsheet or something so you can remember what's been published and what hasn't. I have not done that, so I'm not always sure. This has been published, because here it is. This is, I had a friend who's an artist who invited me one time for the reception to open her art installation. She asked if I would come and read some poetry. I was thrilled. That's a wonderful idea. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a guitar playing in the corner. Why not have a poet reading in the corner? So I was very eager to go read for her opening, and I thought that in gratitude it would be a nice gesture if I wrote at least one poem that was addressed specifically to her artwork. And she had One of her installations was one of these country crossroad signpost. It has the post and it's got all the little arrows. This town's that way, and this town's that way, and this town's that way. And here was the post, and it had about 18 little arrows, and all of them said Damascus. So this is Damascus. Afterward, there was muttering, uneasy bursts of laughter, and the silences that fell around the inn-yard tables under the vines. His men remembered the rough, dusty miles, their robes road-crusted, the hawk-stirred slow air, acrid from the horses' lathered flanks. Something happened. A sharp jingle of harness, jerking muzzles, bridle sawed, loud whinnying, then the topple from the saddle, the sudden heavy grunt as his blunt shoulder struck road rock. His helmet clanged and rolled, and there, for that suspended moment among the terrified tattoo of hooves, he lay blind, head naked as a melon. We saw nothing there, they said, heard nothing, only the swirl and billowing of dust, as if the ground, the very road he traveled, rose up, unhorsed, and claimed him. Now, I don't know if anybody told you all this, but Paul and I are in the same poetry group, the Black Sox Poets, very distinguished group, very diverse. I have a member or two here. Jan's a member. And one of our other members, Mara High, brought us a poem for critique one time, and one of the lines in the poem was, "Tell me about the ocean and I will tell you who you are." And I said, "Can I have that? Do you mind if I borrow that? Because I would love to write a poem under that for the title." And so that's this poem. Tell me about the ocean and I will tell you who you are. Northeasters shook our cottage, slapped the shingles loose, sent rockers sliding down the porch. Cliffs of water toppled and crashed, while we lay playing go fish on the sandy rug, wrapped in our favorite stories of ourselves. Come dawn, I knew its calm before I saw it, the muffled thump and shush, the silver light that ricocheted off the bedroom wall. We ran to give ourselves back to the ocean, hurled ourselves into the suck and curl, or, belly warm beside it on the sand, I swam my own inner ocean, floating theories of my continental edge. But I should say, my nightmares all are drownings, huge waves that rush up silent in the dark. Walking the beach at night, I give wide berth to the water's sighing, heaving deeps that hold the creatures of my fear, swimming below the reach of light. Still, arms wide for balance, now as then, by day I push against the giddy surge to dive into the waves' on-rushing flank, elated as a child come home again. Probably the most potent of everything I've written, I mean essays or attempts at memoir and whatnot. Excuse me. I think the most potent and productive place in my life has been the cottage that my and Elizabeth's common great-grandfather built when, I don't know when, turn of the century. Anyway, it was an old fisherman's cottage, I think, and he kind of enlarged it as his family got more numerous. And it was there where, you know, it was a sort of a wonderful place because we come from a great family of storytellers. And we all heard a whole lot of stories, sort of, especially on the days when there were northeasters and we couldn't go out and get in the ocean. And there were multiple generations there, and I have a great sense that, you know, this is the place that means a lot. So a lot of my stuff is, I don't know whether you all have this or not. Do you have abstract ideas that, without your really being conscious of it, are always in your mind located in physical places. If the subject of death always makes me think about the ground under a fig tree in the backyard of the house that I was raised in. And I never questioned it. It was just automatic. You know, what is death? Death is under the fig tree in the backyard. And then I realized that when we were little, we had a lot of preachers in the family. And when we were little, we used to have what we call shoebox funerals. If we found a dead squirrel or a bird or something, we'd put it in a shoebox, we'd dig a little hole, and we'd have a funeral. And we'd fight over who got to be the preacher and who had to be the mourner and just stand there and not say anything. My cousin usually won. He became a preacher. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, except that Nag's Head and that cottage is where a lot of my head lives. I'm not even sure how relevant that is to this poem. This is called What is Handed Down. When my own season of horse madness came, my mother gave me her riding bat, its pear-shaped leather knob sweet in the palm. It had a curious shaft, finely articulated vertebrae strung on a supple metal rod, a joinery of backbones yielded up by some small creature with wide, quick eyes like hers. Her determined posture, keeping that poised seat atop the lathered creature galloping beneath. And the ones before her, what did they pass on? A legend of women straight as pews, knotted fingers marking their places in hymn books, their heavy hems wind-wrapped against their secret solid limbs, pacing in the shadows of the cottage porch, beside the slate-gray ocean thrashing in its bed, watching over all the small blonde heads of summer. In door-slamming winds that funneled up the narrow stairwell, their solitude, their silences. Inland, in tall rooms glinting with old silver, floorboards worn with generations of exiles, there they hang along the walls, their painted gazes following, the air sharp with their stillness, furtive passions flickering like mice along the baseboards, their pockets stuffed with useless currency, like citizens of conquered countries, each woman lifted in her time at last into the company of patient aunts and sisters, each mouth opening around the still unutterable I am. Now, here's another Nag's Head poem, another indelible memory. The title is He Will Not Hurt Me, He Is Only Sad. On the porch next door, the crazy man rocks all day long, his face to the ocean's bright raveled edge, the sun-dazzled surface. The children watch his sister bring him sandwiches, hear the screen door slam. They quiver to the presence of him next door, bearded, rocking. In the night, sometimes, drawn up from sleep, they slip from their sandy beds, kneel shivering by the window to look for the small stutter of flame down by the water. Squatting on the sand, he pushes bits of driftwood into the fire, urges the flame to life, rises and walks into the black ocean, shuddering in its embrace. He swims straight out from land toward his bride, somewhere in the ocean still, a pale glimmer rising and sinking among the slow shapes circling below the reach of light. He will dive down to her this time, save her this time, or he will turn back, homing on the beacon fire, to stagger up on shore one more time, horror streaming from his beard. Morning slams the gaping ocean shut again, under the high wheeling of gulls, the mild gaze of adults. The children run out from the sheltering porches down to the edge of the world, skirting the little mess of cooling embers, to shriek and jump at the bright waves rolling in. Like I expect every poet in the world, I have in the last year written some things that are directly or indirectly generated by this very strange year. And I would like to, I'm not sure how our time is. Anybody timing me? Interestingly, these pandemic poems seem to be arriving in sonnet form, and I'm not really sure why. I never set out to write a sonnet. I just get somewhere in my head and everything sort of arranges itself, because a sonnet is an extremely convenient little package. It's sort of nice, it's there, you can do a lot of stuff with it. Kind of like the stuffed baked potatoes of poetry. Anyway, so but I've decided my theory is, because I feel I should have a theory, that maybe at some level everything has been so disordered, all known structure has disappeared, and maybe this is some kind of little subconscious appetite for structure and form. So I would, if I have time to read 4 sonnets, I will read you in more or less chronological order what has come to me during the pandemic. The first one is April of 2020, and I will say the first line refers to my friends Janice and Richard here in the front row. April of 2020. We went walking in a friend's woods yesterday. April woods, shiny and still wet from rain. Moss paths spongy underfoot and speckled like a night sky with spring beauty's tiny blooms. Long-legged wild azaleas lined the riverbank, and Adamasco lilies splayed their 6 bright petals above deep matted drifts of dead leaves. Woods always put me in mind of life and death, that great unending contest. These days, of course, demand some deference to death. So all talk lost where the rain-fresh river rushed by. We maintained our ordained distances and kept our long thoughts to ourselves, placing each grateful footstep on this precious earth. The favor. My next door neighbors in New York, caught for now in those tall gray canyons stalked by tragedy. I'm hoping she's adept at the city dweller's tough culture of coping. Meanwhile, through the fence, her garden shouts for joy. Roses, rhododendrons, peonies blazing, rivaling the light. And no one's here but me to get the gain. I slip through the fence's narrow gap, a prowler with no right on her terrain, but guessing she'd deem my trespass a favor, someone in her stead, grateful to see and savor in her garden's bright displays such promise of survival, of better days. This, I thought it was sonnet, but I just counted the lines and there's too many of them. But it feels nice. Outer Banks, Thanksgiving 2020. From the porch, we watched long strings of quick-winged migrant birds above the swells, pelicans that fold and plummet like soft arrowheads headlong into the shining. We've come here hungry for horizons, distance, for the healing crash of surf at sunrise, for the cold tree-bending wind that buffets us when we walk to the wildlife refuge ponds mid-island. On their calm, marsh-mingled waters, the air is crackling with the grand commotion of arrival and departure, the social gabble of duck, goose, coot, and cormorant at rest. Startling white among them, big tundra swans like ballerinas floating, snow geese. In this earth-circling ceremony of birds, the world feels wide again and wild and whole. this winter. This is from coming out here on Highway 70 from Durham. These days that droop with time and silence often draw me out to roam the narrow, lesser roads around my home. Slower going, but there's more to see along the way, more time to see it. Now, I notice how the beaches make these winter woods their own, how among the sober shadowed trees, the scattered flicker of their leaves makes a welcome animation. In forests of the fallen, those leaves alone still hanging on like sentries frozen at their posts. And yet, there's something rather jaunty in the way they're caught, still lifted in salute. Gestures of celebration almost, or defiance. I'm going to give myself one more poem and I can't decide which one I'd rather read. I think I'm going to read this poem, which I just exhumed after not having seen it for decades, because Fran was quite interested to find out when she was sort of digging into who I was and how I started writing poetry, that my first formal poetry training came from Frances Mays. And I thought, and here's Frances, here among us, and I thought, oh my gosh, on the off chance that she should show up, it would really be fun to see if I could find something that I wrote. This was in the it must have been 40 years ago. She was head of the Poetry Center at San Francisco State, and I was a housewife living down the peninsula a little bit outside San Jose, and was getting very interested in reading poetry, and I went with a friend to a reading, and Frances was there, and first of all, I was in California for 20 years, and I loved it. There was much about it I loved very much, but it was never home, and there weren't many people who talked like I do or like Frances did. And I went to this reading, and here was this woman reading poems about being a little girl growing up in a small town in the South, where you walk along the south side of the road on a hot August day, and the tar is so hot it kind of melts, when you step on it. And I just went up to her afterward, and I'm sure I didn't really say this, but I feel like I said, "Can you teach me how to do that?" Anyway, so I was in her workshop for a while, and it was marvelous, and it was the first, and I published a couple of things for the first time, which was quite thrilling, in very modest journals, I will say. Anyway, so I found this one, which may or may not have been written for her workshop, but was probably under her tutelage. May give you a little bit of sense of some of my life in California. This is called To Tom, on the occasion of his leaving his wife of 30 years. You, goddammit, stump buster, builder of the compound in the redwoods, chainsaw rattling the loud dawn down, laughter shredding the dripping fog. You and your dead earnest dialectics. You who wove us in such sweet concentric rings, who lifted us in eagles' nests of talk, where the ferns and bright green seedlings sprang up all around. We thought you were too sore and tired to push off into the woods again. We thought, God help us, you were dying for our sins. The old dogs dozing on the sunlit stoop, who jostled with us toward your warmth, will turn their yellow eyes away now too, and sniff at the wet edges of the clearing. Thank you all so much for listening.
I'm going to consult. What we not need to.
Let's see, usually after meetings, we have a little period of comments and questions for the poets, if people have them.
What a rich feast Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Florence. Are there comments that people would like to make? I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this since I've got the mic and you don't. But
I can take it down. And
that's a perfect way to do it.
This one.
Thank you. And have we properly introduced Kate Dubas, the
Hi.
site manager extraordinaire? Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, I can just pass this around. If anyone has any questions and comments, and we can let me know. Pass around the mic.
Yes, sure.
I can even come behind you. We're fully portable here.
Whoops, let's not trip Brooks.
Yeah.
So, Paul, we really do want to know about the moon.
Yeah, good one. They're nearly portable.
Okay.
Within a radius.
One of the things I've done is I advise a group called Art Mission, which is to collect all human knowledge and put it in places where it can be found after humans may have gone away or after humans may have changed in some sort of way. And so there's what we've done. This is a little complicated, but let's say we've miniaturized a bunch of stuff on very thin nickel disc, about the size of a CD. There's a large stack of them. These are micron thick, and then they're engraved. And some of them are engraved in encoded form, but the top layers that explain how to get to them in multiple languages are done in, so you can tell there's something there, and with a microscope you could do this. So we bought a little bit of space on the Israeli Bereshit project, and it was placed in the Bereshit lander. It's not very big, and the Bereshit lander made it to the moon. Actually, it was in lunar orbit. It did a good job of that, but then they decided to override the computer. The Israelis did, and on the descent, and they were a little over enthusiastic, and it shattered. We don't know if our package shattered. It might have been thrown out somewhere, or it might just be shards waiting to be discovered, like Sappho's charts. Or it might be like the Rosetta Stone. So it's a part of my contribution as information science and library science person was not on the how do you engrave things on micron thick nickel, which nickel doesn't react to anything. That's one of its big advantages. I mean, not to go all techno nerd on you, but was to say Nova Spivak, who was running this, whose mother, we connected because his mother is the poet Catherine Spivak, who was one of Lowell's. Robert Lowell was his babysitter, which amounts to child abuse. His grandfather invented management science. Peter Drucker. Thank you. So all of Drucker's stuff is up there. A bunch of Lowell stuff is up there. All of Catherine Spivak's stuff is up there. All of English language and 4 other Wikipedias. We consulted with some Native American, various indigenous peoples about how they wanted to be represented, and some of that is up there too. So, and there's some images and some stuff about animals, and some children's books that we can't talk about because we're not exactly sure how copyright applies to landing on the moon. Like, who has jurisdiction?
What's the name of the organization that does this?
archmission.org. Arch, A-R-C-H, is an archive. So there's also some stuff in the salt mine in the Czech Republic. There's some other stuff, but you know, I mean, archmission.org. So we did that. I did the content consultant to the founders of that. And then they went, well, don't you want to put something? I went, no, sure. They went, it's all right, we have plenty of room. So, they were very generous. And it's there either in pieces or in whole. And if you don't believe me, you can just like go to the moon. Check it out. Like that.
Oh yeah.
Have you written other forms, short stories?
Back to you.
So, microfiction, I've done a bunch of that. So, or what's also called prose poems. So, one of the last things I've done is actually a drink recipe for alcoholic drink for a journal dedicated to literary well-being with food and drink out of the UK called Spoon Feed, which involves rose nectar and Jenner vodka and a few other things. And there's a story there's a short piece of fiction that goes with it. You know, it's a story that way. But
If we go to your website, we can find.
there's a link to everything that I've published. So, yeah, I mean, part of my particular goal when I came back and looked at it with my free software, free information side, was I no longer cared so much about being in a print journal run by an assistant professor and some graduate students like I used to care about. And I didn't really care about whether I got a fellowship to a conference or to a writer's center, because I'm retired. I'm constantly at a writer's center. It's not right. But also as thinking about retirement, I wanted to make space for other people too. So I'm not applying for an artist. I got an artist fellowship when I was in my 20s, like early 30s. And that was very, very helpful. And but I will never apply again, because now I'm 72, 71. So why do I care? It should belong to people that, you know, are actually making a career. I'm not making a career, I'm making a pleasure that I hope gives pleasure to other people. And that's why I want distribution. I want readers. So if I were to publish again in a journal like the Ohio Review or the Georgia Review, how many of you people would read it? Like none. But if I publish it online, I get several hundred readers worldwide. So that's very fun for me, because that was my goal with free software and free information and that kind of thing. But I don't want to monopolize this, because Florence, I'm sure, has things to say too. Florence, do you also write in other forms that you want to talk about? Forms other than poetry? Do you want to talk about that?
Do I write things other than poetry?
Yes.
Well, I've been trying to write a memoir.
Come here. Come here.
Come on up.
Come up here. Yeah, exactly. Come on up.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
That's all right. I don't think that'll be a problem for you.
Thanks a bunch.
Take up
He's an old friend. Some days. What was the question? Do I write anything beside poetry?
Yeah, that's what I got asked, so I'm passing it to you the same way. Unless you
I
want to talk
do.
about
Well,
writing on
yeah, in fact, I'm having a wonderful and horrible time. I've been going through all of these many file drawers of everything that I've ever saved, that I've ever written since I was an undergraduate. One of the things I have done since I've been in Durham, where I came in 1987, was to do the MALS program, which I have said, the Master of Arts in Liberal Studies, now called Graduate Liberal Studies. I have said over and over, it's the most fun my head ever had, because it's the first time I ever got educated. It's the first time I ever realized that you could think for yourself and come up with your own ideas and kind of test them out, you know. And so I wrote these papers, and I pull this stuff out, and I think, oh my God, I'm so smart. That was beautifully put. That was so good. And I don't know what to do with all this stuff. You know, it's not digital, it's all, a lot of it's on the computer, almost the computer paper that came out with the little things along the edge and sort of pale gray. It's all going to go in the dumpster, and I've been spending a lot of time, I'll just disappear down a rabbit hole for a couple of hours reading these old old essays and research papers. I've been trying to write a memoir for, 20 years, and I can't do that because I keep stubbing my toe on these absolutely immovable contradictions and things in what I feel like has always been sort of a double life. And I don't know how to get beyond it without hurting feelings. Or one of my things that I have written about is, who owns the narrative? Your story is not just about you. Your story is about everybody else in your story. And you say it happened like this for this reason. Who died and made you queen? How about if they have a very different version, which is equally, so it's hard. So I will say, yes, I write a hell of a lot of stuff. I kind of hope it doesn't go in the dumpster, but I don't think anybody else in the world is as interested in it as I am. The other writing I've done, I did some writing I haven't really written for a living, but I've been an editor. I have been a wrangler of words. It's the way I have mainly earned an income most of my working life. The closest I came to writing a book was a very lovely woman in Durham hired me to help her write a book about her career and her mentor. And in the process, we became very good friends. And she couldn't write her way out of a wet paper bag. And so I will say, yes, I wrote the book, but all the substance was hers and subject to her approval. Anyway.
Another question for both of you.
Yes.
How did Black Sox get started, and how important is that in a writer's work to be with the group, to get the response from the group?
I could talk about it all day, but I'm interested in what Paul's going to say.
So the Black Sox were not named the Black Sox in the beginning. They were, it began in a writer's class run by Richard Kinney who's now at the University of Washington and at Duke Continuing Ed. And they the people who were in that group, none of whom I think are in the current iteration of Black Sox.
Not Deborah.
Quilla, no.
Not Deborah.
No, they left. They decided, why should we pay Duke when we can just pay Richard, which Richard liked. And they left and started doing it at each other's houses. And I got brought into the group when Richard left because he recommended that I run it for a while, which I did for a little bit. And they paid me for a little bit, much less than Richard. I found out later. Until I just said, why don't we just not do this pay thing? Why don't we just all kind of be equal? And we brought Deborah into the group at that time. And then, so this is in the 80s at some point. And I went away from it for a while and came back, but it's changed a lot. So how did it get into Black Sox? At one period of about 6 months, I think 3 or 4 of us had poems that had Black Sox in them. So we went, oh, we need a name. Okay, we're the Black Sox Boys. So we became that.
What, you said you went away and then you came back. What?
Well, so you're given different gifts at different times in life that you can execute, and you can make an impact on people, and you can do things with. So I had a parallel track of writing and working on poetry and writing on this technology, doing this technology stuff I was doing. until about 1990. And at that time, I had some mammoth life-changing events. I got an MFA, and I went, I could probably do this. But I also was married to Sally, and I became a father at age 42. And an older father really understands a different kind of obligation. Like, you're not in your child is not taking away your youth or anything at that point. You're really like, it's like so magic, you can't possibly believe that you waited this long to do this thing. Also, we were working on it simultaneously. I was working on some projects with our group. I signed a guy to work with a fellow out of Switzerland who was doing a project called the World Wide Web. And so we worked with Tim Berners-Lee on this, and Tim came over, and we got a lot of involvement in information sharing and this free software thing. And I saw I could have a tremendous impact in that area, and it was going to require a lot of time. And I did have some job offers, places, University of Virginia for 1 year, which was a bad idea. And I came back to a better deal at UNC. But I wanted to spend time with my son, and I wanted to forward this information technology and be involved in the human impact of this. So I just said, okay, I don't have a poetry career. I didn't go to Black Sox. I wasn't writing. I was publishing some, so right along. I think I published in poetry in '96, but it was a poem I'd written 4 or 5 years earlier, because they take that long to piss around with it. But so I had this sort of vacation from poetry, and then when I came back, the landscape had changed. I didn't realize I'd helped change that landscape. When my chapbook went out of print, and I think I sold it out in a year because it was a limited edition by a prize-winning thing. I went back and said, well, I'm sold out, let's do another print. And they went, well, no, it was a prize and it's over. And so I went, you just have to find somebody else. So I sat out on the deck and hard-coded at the time all the HTML, and it's still online in that same form that looks like 1993 or 94, whenever it was. And I'm forever in print now until my biblio goes away, and I wasn't in print before I went out of print. So I came back and looked at this, and I went, why was I even thinking about this other stuff? Really, what I want to do is create relationships and infrastructure with other writers, to be in conversation with editors that actually want to see my work again, and that will nurture me, and I can nurture them, and I can bring writer friends to them, and they can do this. It's the same stuff that I really learned to do in open source software, in distributed creative work. And that's really reformed my whole attitude about poetry, because before I was a competitor. I was competing for scarce resources all the time. Now I can help build infrastructure, and I do that by being board members of other groups, things that I wish had been there to help me to do things at the time when I was younger. And so the North Carolina Writers Network, I helped found that 40 some years ago, and then I went away from it too. And then when I came back, I had a whole new way of looking at it. For one, I was an old guy, and I wasn't competing for anything. I had, a different goal, like what can I leave that's good for other people? What kind of infrastructure, what kind of conversation around literature and participation can I help facilitate? So that's it. That's way too long.
Yeah, I'm not going to take but a minute, but I wanted to go back to the question about the writing group, the sort of mechanics and dynamics of the writing group, which is a really interesting challenge. It's marvelous to have a group that you get to know a lot about.
There we go.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Okay. To have a good critique group, it's a lovely thing when it's balanced. And I think the Sox are good. We're very different as poets, as you will have heard. We have very different backgrounds and prejudices and things about writing. And we know each other really well. We trust each other. Because we've been meeting for years, we know where the critique is coming from. We know that it's friendly, and we know sort of enough about the source. So it's a very valuable, it's a rather fragile and very valuable thing to have a critique group. But I think it also has a drawback, because over years we know, there's a convention in poetry. If you write a poem about, in the first person about meeting your third husband in the elevator, and the group is not supposed to say, "Oh, I didn't know you'd had 3 husbands." It is never, what you say is never autobiographical. You always say, "Well, the narrator seems to feel that so-and-so." But you kind of know who's had the third husband and who hasn't. And consequently, when you read somebody's poem and when you get somebody's critique, you never approach it as a reader would who just found it in a book, or who wandered into a bookstore and went to a reading and sat and listened to a poet that he or she had never heard of. We do accumulate the sediment of this sort of knowledge of each other's context, and it's very hard to judge a poem sometimes. And Tori is nodding. Tori and I were in a poetry group together for a good long time. No, not long enough, actually.
No, but they're saying.
But you know what I mean.
We know each other's back. We infill.
Yes, the
what we know.
interpretive background gets a little messy. It intrudes on just seeing the work as artifact. I mean, a poem is a cri de coeur, and it's a deeply personal thing, but it is a craft. It's like throwing a pot. I mean, however much your soul is in it, it ain't a good poem just because your soul is in it. It has to be something that has been skillfully crafted, and that the whole kind of soup, the wonderful soup of poetry critique groups, both contributes hugely to that and presents its own little challenge. I think I'm through.
I think basically.
Thank you all. What a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Paul, thank you, Florence. Thank you.